Sort of two aspects that I'll be running through today. First of all, I'll be just touching upon Fleet Manager. So Fleet Manager we introduced earlier on this year, although we have had centralized management available for some of our larger enterprise customers for a few years now, but we've introduced Fleet Manager for general availability now. And whether you've got 1 or 100 clusters, Fleet Manager still would be of benefit, and this allows you to then manage your estate very simply in the same way as you'll see in a few moments when you have also a very simple interface to manage the actual local environment itself. And so this gives you an overview of your entire estate, and again we're just trying to give you the most important information up front. Jon's talked a lot about the simplicity of the platform, and really what we're trying to do is just give you as much time back as possible, so you're not having to sort of directly technically needing to manage the actual infrastructure platform itself. So what we want to do as soon as you log into any of the environments or management platforms is to provide that information that's most important straight away. So you can see here that we've got an overview of the health of the environment or the clusters that are deployed. Also we can get an overview of the software versions that are deployed as well, and obviously being compliant, especially with a larger estate, is important. And I'll come to some of the key features as well in a few moments, where we run through how easy it is to make sure that you are compliant and up to date without any impact to production. And then from there, you can then drill down, as you'd expect, in more detail. So you can look in more detail, I should say, at all of the clusters in your environment. Again, you can obviously search or sort by health. So you can see we've got various different conditions set in our test environment here. You can also see that you've got usage information as well. It's a very high level. And also you can drive updates from here as well. So you can actually, without logging into each of your sites, still manage and keep up to date in your entire environment. And there will be some other key features that we'll be introducing as part of Fleet Manager as well going forwards. And we'll have the ability for you to then define the cluster configuration prior to deployment. And in fact, I'll run through how easy it is to configure a cluster in a few moments, but certainly when you deploy a large number of clusters, there's still a certain amount of configuration required. And we're introducing what we call zero touch, probably towards the end of the next quarter. So over the next few months, we'll be introducing zero touch into Fleet Manager. And that will allow you then from the asset list to define a cluster, configure the attributes, so IP address for management interfaces and so on. And then when the actual nodes come online at a site, they will then phone home, pull down the config and auto configure. So further reducing the overhead from a configuration point of view. Okay, so you can see here I've just drilled down, I've just selected one of our test environments here. So I've just drilled down in a bit more detail so you get an overview of what's running, the state of the cluster itself. I just mentioned a few moments ago that you can look at your assets, and again, zero touch will build upon this functionality and feature set. So again, you'll be able to pick out these particular assets here and then deploy against those as well. So again, making installation very straightforward. And then beyond that as well, then you can then use in our Ansible and Cloud Init and API capabilities, even deploy without actually touching the management interface at all. And certainly for larger environments, that's pretty key. And we're seeing that it's becoming more important in the larger environments. Okay, so I'm just going to switch gears and move across to the local cluster interface. And Jon, if you think I'm missing anything, as you've just done sort of a great intro there and run through the platform, please jump in and correct me or ask me to go into a bit more detail if you think I've skipped over something.
I always will.
Thank you. Right, so this is the local management interface. We talked about simplicity. To get to this point, as Jon mentioned, only takes literally a few minutes to initialize a cluster. It may take longer to rack and stack the actual hardware, but from a configuration point of view, literally 5 minutes for me to configure a 3-node HE150 cluster. And this is what I'm logged into here. So Jon ran through that a few moments ago. So the Intel Enterprise NUC hardware this is what we're demonstrating on at the moment. As Jon mentioned, irrespective of the hardware, the interface is similar or the same layout. The only difference would be self-evidently if you had a higher capacity node, then obviously that would be reflected in the head-up display here. So there's two areas of the main management interface. You've got the head-up display, which gives you cluster-wide information at a glance, and then we've got what we call the VM card view in the bottom portion of the interface here. But again, just going back to that piece there, very simple setup, 2 IP addresses per node, 1 command to initialize, and it is just SC cluster in it, presents you with a list of the nodes. You say yes, cluster self configures, you have a cup of tea, and then you're ready to log into the interface here. And you can log in to any one of the nodes as well. So there's no single point of failure from a management perspective. You don't need to set up or stand up a management server. So there's no vSphere server or system center environment need to be configured directly. And again, you don't even need the fleet manager either. You can obviously configure this locally, log into any one of the nodes, and then start to configure your environment. Really straightforward one-time configuration. And you can see here, this is pretty much fresh out of the box. So you register the cluster, configure DNS as well if you've got that configured locally. OpenID Connect as well. So if you want to integrate that into your AD environment, then you can use the OpenID Connect provider option here. Or if you want multi-factor authentication, for example. Email alerts as well. So I'll come back to the alerting in a few moments, but if there's a change in the health of the cluster, Jon mentioned this a few moments ago, we don't need you to get your hands dirty as such. The cluster manages itself. If it needs any intervention, then it will send you an email alert. And also you can output to a syslog server as well. If you want to capture more verbose information, then you can simply do that through the syslog environment here. Beyond that, media upload. So you can upload ISOs from which to install from. So you can see I've got a few different distributions already uploaded here. And at that point, I can start to create virtual machines. I don't need to do anything else. You notice we haven't talked about storage management because there isn't any storage management in the traditional sense, although we still provide all of the same functionalities you'd expect in a highly available virtualized environment. So again, there's no single point of failure from a data storage perspective. We stripe and mirror the data across all of the drives and nodes in the cluster to provide fault tolerance at the data storage layer. And also from a node perspective, it's N+1 redundancy as well. So if a node fails, then the VMs would automatically fail over and be restarted in one of the remaining nodes in the cluster. And that's all managed automatically. Beyond that as well, so it's just before we move off from here, we talked about update management. So we talked about that in Fleet Manager. Local update management. So you can see here, I've got a new GA release, which I've not applied yet. I can simply select the apply update option. The cluster will then go off and automatically check the health of the cluster, apply the update. Again, you don't need to figure out, where do I need to place the VMs? Do I need to put a node into maintenance mode? Excuse me. We'll do all of that for you. And again, if there's any issue with the health of the cluster, we will then alert you before kicking off the update. So it's single click, non-disruptive upgrades. And remote support as well. Again, Jon touched upon that a few moments ago. So we've got a built-in phone home feature. Get in touch with our support team for critical issues. They're available 24/7, and they'll typically give you a support code, pop that into the interface, hit open connection, and that will then initiate an outbound SSH to our support team. And that means then they can get on at the back end and then diagnose any issues. Hardware replacement comes as standard as well with scale care. So again, we've got all those areas covered there, both from software and hardware perspective. And before, lastly, I move out to Control Center and just run through creating a couple of virtual machines. Other key feature as well is built-in data protection features. And we don't claim this as a complete replacement for traditional backup, but it's there to complement traditional backup. As discussed earlier on, we have a very close relationship with Acronis. You can actually use the built-in data protection features though for sort of the first line of defense. And we leverage our snapshot technology that's built into Scribe. We test and allow a very large number of snapshots, which are typically into the thousands. So you can see by that number, we have very little impact on performance in compared to traditional file-based snapshots. And you can define your own rules here, and you can again have multiple rules associated with the schedule. So I can define the frequency, when it's ran, at what time. Also retention period as well, so I can set a local retention period here, and also a remote retention policy as well for, say, if I'm replicating to a DR environment or DR node. And so again, I can apply that either to an individual or group of virtual machines. And again, this is all built in, and I'll show you what the recovery looks like in a few moments' time. Okay, so let's run through a quick a few steps here just to create a virtual machine to see what the process looks like. So I'm going to pick on Gary, who's been quiet so far. So I'm just going to add in a SQL Server for Gary. I'm then going to add an ET Works group as well, just sort of allows me to group together a large number of VMs very simply. So I can add the SQL tag as well. Again, these tags can be anything. I'm going to stick with the defaults here, but I'm going to allocate a little bit more compute resource. So the RAM, I'm going to add in a few additional virtual disks as well. And if you remember earlier on, I mentioned that we don't really talk about storage management in the traditional sense. There's no data stores or cluster shared volumes to configure, no iSCSI targets or LUNs. All of the storage is VM centric, as you can see. And then I'm going to select the OS from which to boot from. Okay, and then I'm going to now use the group to filter. So I'm just going to use the ET Works filter here. So you can see that I've got Gary's SQL Server. And then I can apply that data protection schedule that we just looked at a few moments ago. So I'm just going to select the demo snap schedule. And you can see within a few seconds, it's very easy to create a VM and then protect that. And also I can set up replication as well. So I can then replicate to a target cluster or single node system. Functionalities are identical. And at that point, then I can simply spin that VM up. You most typically, though, build from a template. So you have a synthesis prep template. The great thing about our snapshot technology and cloning technology means is that we're very space efficient. We don't duplicate data when cloning a template, and also we don't have a direct child-parent relationship either, so you don't have to worry about those normal issues that you would see. Okay, so now we have ET Works Gary SQL Server up and running. I can open the console view here, so you can see that the guest OS is now booting up. I can also then create a manual snapshot. So I'm just going to snapshot to that virtual machine. And then if we go into the snapshot view here, you now see we've got that snapshot available. Also, there's not a lot of data there as yet, but you get the idea. And then I've got a few options here. I can either clone the entire system. And again, it doesn't matter how much data is associated with the virtual machine directly. I can then access that backup instantly. And so you can see that's now available for me. Or I've got the option to just mount and recover files from a virtual disk from the snapshot. So again, you can see I've just got into the snapshot. I can then select a particular virtual disk and either mount that back to the same system, just recover a few files, or another VM on the cluster itself. So again, these are all features that are built into the platform. And recovery in a DR environment would be identical as well. You just go back to the VM that you want to recover, select the point in time that you want to access, and then clone that particular snapshot, power that up, and that would then be the production version or copy of that virtual machine. Okay, so you've almost had a training course on the platform. That's a high-level run through of the interface. You can see that it's designed to be as simple as possible. And you're all, I'm sure, experienced IT administrators. The whole point of the platform is that within sort of 10 or 15 minutes, you'd know pretty much everything you need to know about the platform, and then you'll be able to administer that going forwards. And again, we don't expect you to wade through lots of event logs to figure out what's going on or the health of the cluster. You can see actually I've got a condition set here in the head-up display. So I could actually have a drill down here. You can see actually my remote single node system is actually offline, for example. So we try to use plain language wherever possible to indicate what the issue is. And then you obviously can investigate why that's actually down and offline. The same would be the case if a disk had failed or a network interface was down as well. Again, we try to use plain language to help you understand what's going on and then help resolve that issue. Okay, John. That's sort of a quick run through there of the high level platform. I don't know how we're doing for time. I don't know if we want to sort of touch upon some of the other key features of the storage stack, some of the configuration options, and also I can talk about migration as well if you think we have the time. I assume that we've got a little bit of time then if that's the case, so I'll just touch upon some of the other options that we have and some of the features as well. So it's very easy to expand an environment, and let's just take a moment to go back to the interface here. You can see this is a 3-node cluster. If we want to add additional resource, then we can simply add a new node to the cluster. In the same way, it's very simple to configure the cluster from the outset. Adding a node is very simple, straightforward. It takes about 5 minutes for a new node to come online, depending on what's going on in the cluster at that period of time. You can then mix and match nodes as well. So again, you have a lot of flexibility there. So I can add a storage only node, for example. So if I only really want to add storage, you don't really care about added additional compute, then again, I've got that option. And also, conversely as well, I can then add in a compute heavy node, for example. So say I've got a particular application and I need faster CPU, for example, then I can actually then add a new node that has a faster CPU for that particular application, and then I can use sort of our node affinity rules then to help with the placement of that virtual machine as well. So again, we try and be as flexible as possible when you expand. And again, there's no downtime, no reconfiguration. As we've talked about a few times now, you don't have to reconfigure storage or even configure storage in the traditional sense. And that also extends to when you add in an additional node to the cluster as well. And you can see here from the disk view or storage details view, should I say, that we provide all the sort of the pertinent information, allow you at a glance to understand what's going on, so you can then sort of manage the storage utilization going forwards. And also you can see here, we've saved a certain amount of space here through the node level dedupe that's built into the storage stack, for example. And I can't actually show you on this particular cluster. This is an all NVMe cluster, but we do support auto tiering as well on our hybrid clusters. And again, that's built into the platform, and it's a per virtual disk level as well. You can actually change that auto tiering performance as well and behavior. So again, allow you to customize the performance profile in a hybrid environment, but again, still make that very simple to achieve. Okay, so John, have we got time to talk about migration, or would you like to cover anything else?
Yeah, let's quickly squeeze it in.
Yeah, okay, right. It won't take very long, but yeah, we've got a couple of options regarding migration. Obviously, you can use Acronis to migrate as well. So, great built-in features with the convert to VM option and functionality within Acronis. So you can use Acronis or any other backup that allows better recovery, which is pretty much all of the backup solutions out there that you can think of. You've got the ability to import a virtual machine from an SMB share as well. So we can actually import a virtual machine offline, of course, or you can use HC3 Move, which is an agent-based migration utility. It's our preferred method. It minimizes downtime. It's very simple to use. And again, as I mentioned, because you can actually start that migration whilst in production, it really is a nice way of actually migrating from anything, actually, whether it's physical or virtual, onto our platform.